What if the food sitting in your refrigerator right now is either building your immune system or slowly wearing it down, and you have no way of knowing which one just by looking at the label? Probiotics are living organisms that take up residence in your digestive tract and quietly influence everything from inflammation to how efficiently you extract nutrients from your food. Today, I am walking you through 20 of the most powerful probiotic foods on the planet. Foods that entire civilizations built their survival around long before anyone had a microscope. Stay, because number 9 on this list is a drink from the American South that your grandmother probably made from scratch without ever calling it medicine, and modern science is only now explaining exactly why it worked. And number 16 is a cheese tradition from the mountains of Virginia that most people drive straight past without ever knowing what is actually happening inside those aging rooms. Hit subscribe, because every single week we connect the food wisdom of the past with the research that proves it right. Let's get into it. Here are 20 probiotic-rich superfoods, ranked from remarkable to extraordinary. Number 1, kefir, the fermented milk that outperforms almost everything else sitting in your dairy aisle. Kefir traces back to the Caucasus Mountains, where shepherds carried kefir grains, small rubbery clusters of bacteria and yeast bound together in a matrix of proteins and sugars, wrapped in cloth pouches slung against their bodies, adding fresh milk each day and drinking whatever had fermented overnight. They had no concept of a microbiome, no understanding of bacterial strains, but they understood something practical and non-negotiable, that a family's kefir grains were worth protecting like property, passed down rather than purchased, because a lost culture could not simply be bought back. Modern laboratory analysis backs up that instinct in ways those shepherds could never have measured. Kefir contains dozens of distinct bacterial and yeast strains working in symbiosis, far more than the 2 or 3 typically found in standard commercial yogurt. A study published in the Journal of Dairy Science found that regular kefir consumption improved markers of gut barrier function and reduced inflammatory signaling in the digestive tract over a period of measured weeks. In Colorado, where small batch dairies and a resurgent homesteading culture have quietly built a following around raw and fermented milk products far outside the mainstream wellness industry, kefir has become a staple ingredient rather than a novelty. Drink 4 to 6 ounces on an empty stomach in the morning, before eating anything else, when stomach acid is at its lowest and more live bacteria survive the trip to your intestines intact. Homemade kefir, made using live grains rather than a powdered starter, delivers a bacterial density that store-bought versions simply cannot match, regardless of price point. If you are buying instead of making it, look for brands that list a specific strain count on the label rather than a vague reference to probiotics, since that level of transparency usually signals a producer who actually understands what they are selling. Give it a week of daily consumption before deciding whether you notice a difference, since gut adaptation to a new bacterial load rarely happens overnight, no matter how potent the food. Store in the coldest part of your refrigerator, since heat is the fastest way to kill off the very organisms you are trying to consume. Number 2, live culture yogurt, the probiotic food most people already own but are quietly using incorrectly. The words live and active cultures printed on a yogurt container are not decoration or marketing filler. They are the entire point of the product, the single detail that determines whether what you're eating is a fermented food or simply a dairy dessert with tangy flavor profile. Yogurt that has been heat-treated after culturing, a common practice used to extend shelf life, contains no living organisms whatsoever and functions purely as a protein and calcium source, nothing more. Genuine live culture yogurt, made with Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus as its foundational strains, has been shown in clinical research to shorten the duration and severity of antibiotic-related digestive upset and to improve markers of immune regulation in the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. A study in the journal Nutrients found measurable, statistically significant differences in gut microbial composition between women who consumed live culture yogurt daily over a 12-week period and those who consumed pasteurized dairy products of equal quantity and macronutrient profile. Choose plain and full fat whenever possible. The fat itself is not the problem and never has been. The added sugar loaded into flavor varieties is the actual issue worth avoiding. Sweeten it yourself at home with fresh fruit or a drizzle of raw honey, and you keep the full probiotic benefit without absorbing the sugar load that most flavor commercial versions are quietly built around. A single cup of plain yogurt also delivers a meaningful dose of calcium and roughly 17 grams of protein, which is part why it has remained a breakfast staple across so many different cultures for so many generations, long before anyone framed it as a wellness food. Even 5 minutes of straining through cheesecloth at home will thicken regular live culture yogurt into something close to Greek style, concentrating the protein while keeping every bit of the bacterial content intact. Number 3. Sauerkraut, the preservation method that predates refrigeration by several thousand years. Long before canning existed as a technology, cultures across Europe relied on nothing more than cabbage, salt, and patience to produce a food that would reliably last through an entire winter without spoiling in root cellars that had no temperature control whatsoever. The lactic acid bacteria naturally present on raw cabbage leaves do all the actual work, provided the salt concentration is correct and the environment stays sealed away from oxygen. In the mountains of North Carolina, where root cellar traditions and small batch home preserving never fully disappeared the way they did in more rapidly urbanized parts of the country, raw fermented sauerkraut remains a genuine pantry staple rather than a recent wellness trend picked up from a podcast. Here's a distinction that trips up most shoppers standing in a grocery aisle. Shelf-stable sauerkraut sold in a can or a sealed jar sitting at room temperature has been pasteurized during processing and contains no living bacteria at all. It is, at that point, simply pickled cabbage, not a probiotic food in any meaningful sense. Raw sauerkraut, found refrigerated rather than shelf-stable, made from nothing but cabbage and salt, delivers billions of live lactobacillus organisms in a single serving. 2 tablespoons can genuinely outperform an entire bottle of commercial probiotic capsules purchased at a pharmacy. Read the ingredient list carefully before you buy. If vinegar appears anywhere on that label, the product was not lacto-fermented, no matter what the packaging implies. Making your own at home requires nothing more sophisticated than shredded cabbage, roughly 2% salt by weight, and a jar heavy enough to keep everything submerged below the brine line for a week or 2 on the counter. Number 4, kimchi, the fermented staple that layers probiotic bacteria with genuinely potent anti-inflammatory compounds in a single dish. Korean households have produced kimchi for roughly 2,000 years, refining regional variations by climate and available vegetables, and a communal kimchi-making tradition known as kimjang was formally recognized by UNESCO in 2013 as an intangible cultural heritage, not for flavor alone, but for what the practice represents about food knowledge deliberately passed between generations rather than lost to convenience. In California, home to one of the largest Korean American communities anywhere in the country, authentic small batch kimchi is widely available fresh from local markets, not just in the shelf-stable jarred versions found in most national grocery chains across the rest of the country. The fermentation process involves multiple bacterial species, working in careful sequence as acidity rises over days, primarily Lactobacillus plantarum, producing a dynamic microbial community that closely mirrors the diversity found in a genuinely healthy human gut. A study published in the journal Beneficial Microbes found that regular kimchi consumption improved gut microbial diversity and reduced fasting blood glucose in participants measured over an 8-week observation period. 2 to 3 tablespoons alongside a meal is enough to deliver a meaningful daily dose without overwhelming a digestive system that is not yet accustomed to fermented foods. If the jar fizzes slightly when you open the lid, that is simply active fermentation still continuing, a sign of a living product rather than something gone wrong. Number 5, kombucha, the fermented tea that quietly existed for 2,000 years before becoming a modern grocery store staple sold in dozens of flavors. Originating in northeastern China and spreading gradually through Russia and Eastern Europe along established trade routes, kombucha is produced when symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, commonly called a SCOBY, metabolizes sugar dissolved in sweetened tea over a fermentation window of 1 to 4 weeks depending on ambient temperature. The organic acids produced during that process, including acetic acid and gluconic acid, have documented antimicrobial activity against several pathogens, while simultaneously creating internal conditions where beneficial bacteria continue to thrive and multiply. In Washington state, particularly around Seattle, small kombucha producers have built an entire regional industry around slow, traditional brewing methods rather than the rapid, heavily carbonated mass production found in most national brands. Research published in the Journal of Food Science found meaningful antimicrobial activity in traditionally brewed kombucha, samples tested against several common pathogenic bacterial strains. Drink 4 to 8 ounces alongside a meal rather than consuming a full bottle at once, since the organic acid and trace alcohol content of commercial kombucha can accumulate quickly and cause digestive discomfort in people unaccustomed to it. A second fermentation with fresh fruit added for a few days will build natural carbonation without any need for added sugar or artificial flavoring. Number 6, miso, the fermented soybean paste that Japanese cooking has relied on continuously for well over 1,000 years. Miso is produced by inoculating cooked soybeans and sometimes rice or barley depending on regional style, with a mold called Aspergillus oryzae, known in Japan as koji, which slowly breaks down proteins and starches over months of careful aging in wooden vessels. Zen Buddhist monks historically used miso as a concentrated staple food during long fasting periods, valuing its nutritional density every bit as much as its distinctive umami flavor. In Massachusetts, the macrobiotic food movement that took root in the greater Boston area during the middle of the 20th century helped introduce miso and other fermented Japanese staples to a wider American audience decades before they became mainstream grocery store items. Research shows that unpasteurized miso contains multiple lactobacillus strains along with beneficial yeasts that actively support gut lining integrity and reduce localized inflammation. The rule that matters most when cooking with it is temperature, full stop. Add miso only after cooking is finished, never during active heat, since temperatures above roughly 115 degrees Fahrenheit kill the living cultures outright. Dissolve a tablespoon in warm, not boiling, broth at the very end of preparation to preserve everything that makes it valuable. Darker miso varieties are fermented longer and carry a bolder, stouter flavor, while lighter variety fermented for only a few weeks stay mild enough to use in dressings and marinades. Number 7. Tempeh, the fermented soybean cake that functions as a genuinely complete protein source on its own. Originating in Java, Indonesia, tempeh is made by binding cooked soybeans together with a mold called Rhizopus oligosporus into a dense, sliceable cake that can be cooked much like meat in a wide range of preparations. The fermentation process breaks down phytic acid, the anti-nutrient compound that otherwise blocks mineral absorption in raw legumes, and simultaneously predigests the soy proteins into shorter peptide chains that are considerably easier for the human digestive system to process and absorb. A single cup delivers roughly 30 grams of protein, rivaling many animal-based sources by weight. Research suggests that regular tempeh consumption is associated with improved microbiome diversity and reduced circulating inflammatory markers, benefits that extend well beyond simple protein delivery alone. Slice it thin, marinate it in a mixture of soy sauce, garlic, and fresh ginger, and pan fry until the surface turns deeply golden and slightly crisp. It works as a direct, satisfying substitute in tacos, stir-fries, and grain bowls for anyone looking to add fermented plant protein into a weekly rotation without sacrificing texture or hardiness. Steaming the block for 10 minutes before marinating helps it absorb flavor more evenly, since the surface opens up slightly under gentle heat. Number 8. Natto, the single most intense fermented food most Americans have never actually tasted. Natto is soybeans fermented with a specific strain of Bacillus subtilis, producing a texture so sticky, stringy, and pungent that it genuinely challenges nearly every first-time Western palate that encounters it. Japanese school children eat it for breakfast without a second thought, a food so normalized in daily life that its intensity barely registers. What makes natto extraordinary is not the texture, though the texture is unforgettable, but the enzyme it produces during fermentation, called natto kinase, which is documented fibrinolytic activity, meaning it actively helps break down fibrin, the structural protein that forms blood clots in the circulatory system. Clinical research has linked natto kinase supplementation to improve blood pressure readings and better overall cardiovascular function in measured trials. Natto is also, by a wide margin, the richest known dietary source of vitamin K2 in its 7-Malawian quatches form, a compound that directs calcium toward bone tissue and away from arterial walls where it does not belong. Bacillus subtilis is spore-forming, which means it survives passage through stomach acid far more reliably than most bacterial strains found in fermented foods. Serve it over warm rice with a splash of soy sauce, exactly as traditional preparation dictates. It is, without question, an acquired food. It is genuinely worth acquiring. Frozen natto, found in the freezer section of most Japanese and Asian grocery stores, thaws in the refrigerator overnight, and retains its full bacterial activity once defrosted. A small amount stirred into rice, rather than eaten alone, is the easiest way for a first-timer to get past the texture and taste the actual flavor underneath. This is exactly the point in the video where I ask you to hit that like button, because if natto just changed how you think about fermented food, that single reaction tells YouTube to put this video in front of more people who need to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now before you forget. We publish new videos connecting traditional food wisdom with modern nutritional research every single week, no exceptions. 12 items left, and some of the very best ones are still ahead of us, including a drink most of the country has never even heard of that outdates the entire modern wellness industry by centuries. Number 9. Fermented buttermilk, the drink that Southern kitchens never actually stopped making, even as the rest of the country moved on. Real buttermilk is the tangy liquid left behind after churning butter from cultured cream, and was a genuine daily staple across farming communities, stretching from Virginia down to the Carolinas and into Texas, consumed for its digestive benefits long, before anyone in those kitchens used the word probiotic. Modern commercial buttermilk sold in most grocery stores today is an imitation in every meaningful sense. Fresh milk with lactic acid added purely for flavor, frequently pasteurized afterward for shelf stability, which eliminates any living bacteria that might have been present. Genuine cultured buttermilk lists live cultures directly and explicitly on the label and delivers Lactococcus lactis in meaningful, measurable concentrations per serving. Its notably lower fat content makes it gentler on digestion than whole milk, since the fermentation process pre-converts much of the lactose before it ever reaches your gut. Use it in salad dressings and baked goods for a fermentative boost, or simply drink it cold with a pinch of salt the way it was traditionally served on working farms where nothing edible was ever allowed to go to waste. Even a splash stirred into cornbread batter or biscuit dough noticeably changes the texture, producing a more tender crumb than milk alone ever will. Number 10. Raw fermented pickles, the food that grocery store shelves consistently and almost universally mislabel. In New York, particularly around the Lower East Side, pickle making through lacto-fermentation was a defining feature of immigrant food culture for over a century, long before pickles became a mass-produced national commodity sold in identical jars from coast to coast. The pickles sitting at room temperature in the center aisle of most stores are cucumbers preserved in vinegar brine, not fermented at all in any biological sense. Real fermented pickles are made by submerging fresh cucumbers in a plain salt brine with no vinegar whatsoever, allowing naturally occurring Lactobacillus plantarum already present on the cucumber skin to convert sugars into lactic acid over a period of 3 to 7 days at room temperature. Research on lacto-fermented vegetables consistently shows viable bacterial counts in the range of 1 billion colony-forming units per serving, more than enough to survive digestion and reach the gut fully intact. You'll find real fermented pickles refrigerated rather than shelf-stable, with an ingredient list limited strictly to cucumbers, water, salt, and spices, nothing else. They cost noticeably more and spoil considerably faster than their vinegar-based imitators, sitting one aisle over. That instability is not a flaw. It is the proof that they are genuinely alive. A simple taste test settles any doubt at the store, since real fermented pickles carry a distinctly sour, almost effervescent tang that vinegar brine can only approximate and never quite replicate. Number 11. Lassi, the yogurt drink that Ayurvedic tradition has prescribed for digestive health for roughly 3,000 years without interruption. Made by blending live culture yogurt with water and a mix of spices, Lassi dilutes the protein density of straight yogurt while fully preserving its bacterial content, producing something noticeably lighter and easier on the stomach, particularly in hot climates where heavier dairy can feel taxing. In Texas, home to a large and rapidly growing South Asian population concentrated around Houston and Dallas, Lassi has moved well beyond specialty grocery stores and into mainstream restaurant menus across the state. Traditional Ayurvedic physicians prescribe savory lassi made with cumin and black salt specifically for digestive complaints, and modern research on cumin has since confirmed that it stimulates digestive enzyme production, meaningfully compounding the benefit already provided by the live cultures present in the base yogurt. Blend 1 part plain full-fat yogurt with roughly 1 part water. Add a generous pinch of salt and ground cumin, and you have a functional digestive tonic ready in under a minute with no special equipment required. Sweet lassi, made instead with honey, mango, or rosewater, delivers the same live cultures for anyone who prefers a dessert-style version. Number 12. Ayran, the salted yogurt drink from the historic crossroads of the Silk Road. Consumed across Turkey, the Levant, and Central Asia for centuries, Ayran is simply live culture yogurt, water, and salt blended together into a frothy, cold drink typically served alongside grilled meats and flatbread. The salt included is not incidental to the recipe. It creates internal conditions that are mildly hostile to pathogenic bacteria, while the salt-tolerant lactic acid bacteria naturally present in the yogurt continue to thrive undisturbed. Populations with consistently high traditional consumption of fermented dairy products like Ayran show gut microbiome profiles with greater overall diversity and measurably lower markers of chronic low-grade inflammation in comparative population research. Make it at home with 2 parts plain live culture yogurt to 1 part cold water and a generous pinch of salt blended together until visibly frothy. It requires no special ingredients whatsoever and delivers a probiotic dose most people in the United States are simply not getting from any other regular source in their diet. Served ice cold on a hot afternoon, it functions as a genuine electrolyte drink long before sports beverages existed in any commercial form. Number 13. Film joke, the Scandinavian fermented milk that Minnesota's Nordic immigrant communities have kept alive for well over a century. Phil, as it is commonly known, is a distinctly ropey, pourable fermented milk cultured with specific strains of Lactococcus lactis that produce a unique texture through the secretion of exopolysaccharides, compounds with documented immune-modulating properties that extend beyond the live bacteria themselves. Research conducted in Sweden examining households with regular film joe consumption found that children raised in those homes showed greater gut microbial diversity and notably lower rates of allergic conditions compared to households with minimal fermented food intake overall. It remains a fairly niche product across most of the country today, available mainly through Scandinavian specialty grocers and a growing number of natural food retailers. Use it exactly as you would drinkable yogurt. Pour over granola in the morning or blend it straight into a smoothie for an easy fermentative boost. Some Nordic heritage grocers in the upper Midwest now carry it alongside imported rye crisp bread, a pairing that has stayed essentially unchanged for generations. Number 14, skyr, the Icelandic dairy staple technically classified as a cheese, but eaten in practice like yogurt every single day. Made by culturing skim milk with heirloom bacterial strains and then straining away the resulting whey, traditional skyr delivers roughly 22 grams of protein per cup with minimal fat content, making it one of the most protein-dense fermented dairy products available anywhere. The heirloom cultures used in authentic skyr production differ meaningfully from standard commercial yogurt strains and have been maintained through an unbroken dairy tradition for close to 1,000 years on an island with very limited agricultural options. Research comparing traditional skyr consumers directly against populations eating primarily commercial dairy has found measurable, consistent differences in gut microbial composition between the two groups. Some skyr sold internationally today has been pasteurized after culturing purely for extended shelf stability, which eliminates the probiotic benefit entirely while keeping the protein content and thick texture fully intact. Look explicitly for the words live and active cultures printed on the label before you buy it. Its thick, almost custard-like texture holds up well under fruit and a drizzle of honey, making it an easy substitute anywhere a recipe calls for Greek yogurt. Number 15, cottage cheese with added live cultures, the quiet upgrade most shoppers walk straight past without ever noticing. Standard cottage cheese is made by acidifying and draining milk curds, a process that typically eliminates any meaningful bacterial content somewhere along the way. It remains an excellent protein source in its own right, roughly 25 grams per cup, but it is not inherently a probiotic food in the way many people assume. A growing number of brands, increasingly visible on shelves in Florida and other fast-growing grocery markets where health-focused dairy products have expanded rapidly in recent years, now deliberately add Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidobacterium strains back into cottage cheese after the initial production process is complete. Research on these fortified products shows the added bacteria remain genuinely viable through the point of consumption and survive digestive transit at rates fully comparable to standard yogurt. Check the label for named live strains listed explicitly rather than simply assuming every tub of cottage cheese on the shelf qualifies as a probiotic food. Pairing it with fresh pineapple or a soft-boiled egg turns it into a genuinely complete meal rather than a plain protein afterthought. Number 16, raw aged cheese, the probiotic sitting quietly on your cheese board without anyone thinking twice about it. In the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, a growing number of small creameries have revived traditional raw milk cheese making, producing aged cheddars and Alpine-style wheels using methods that predate modern industrial pasteurization requirements by well over a century. Cheeses like these, alongside traditional Gouda and authentic Swiss varieties made the same way, are genuinely fermented foods, deliberately inoculated with bacterial cultures that drive flavor development slowly over months of careful aging in temperature-controlled rooms. Lactobacillus helveticus and related species often remain viable in the finished product because the low moisture and high salt content of properly aged cheese creates a naturally protective environment for bacterial survival over time. Research published in the International Journal of Food Microbiology found viable bacterial populations exceeding 1 million colony-forming units per gram in certain raw milk-aged cheeses tested, while pasteurized versions of that same cheese type showed essentially none at all. In the United States, raw milk cheeses must legally be aged a minimum of 60 days before sale, which allows sufficient natural acidification to occur for food safety. A well-stocked specialty cheese counter, rather than a standard supermarket case, is usually the more reliable place to find genuine raw milk selections with a clearly labeled aging date. Ask the person behind the counter directly whether a particular wheel was made with raw or pasteurized milk, since that detail is not always obvious from packaging alone. Number 17, beet kvass, the Eastern European tonic that quietly predates the entire modern wellness beverage industry by several centuries. Made by submerging raw beets in salted water and allowing lactofermentation to proceed slowly at room temperature for 2 to 5 days, beet kvass produces a deep ruby liquid that is simultaneously probiotic, genuinely mineral-rich, and traditionally used across the region to support liver function and healthy digestion. In Colorado, particularly around Denver, communities with Eastern European and Russian heritage have kept beet kvass in regular household rotation as a practical staple rather than treating it as a specialty item found only in niche stores. Beets themselves contribute betaine, a compound that supports bile production and fat digestion, along with naturally occurring dietary nitrates that the body converts into nitric oxide, a pathway closely linked to healthy blood pressure regulation. The fermentation process itself adds lactobacillus species directly into the liquid, along with B vitamins and organic acids that support the structural integrity of the gut lining over time. Make it at home with nothing more than organic beets, filter water and salt, and a few days of patience on the counter. A small glass, roughly 2 to 4 ounces, taken once a day is a traditional serving size, since beet kvass is meant to be sipped as a tonic rather than consumed by the glassful. Number 18. Fermented garlic, the probiotic that also happens to function as one of the most studied natural antimicrobials in existence today. Submerged in salt brine and left to lactoferment for 1 to 3 weeks, garlic undergoes 3 distinct transformations at the same time. The harsh bite mellows considerably. Allicin converts into allicin through bacterial enzymatic activity, actually making sulfur compounds more bioavailable rather than less, and the surrounding brine itself becomes densely populated with beneficial lactobacillus species. In California, particularly around Gilroy, a region long associated with large-scale commercial garlic production, small independent fermenters have started bottling garlic brine as a standalone product rather than discarding it as a simple byproduct. Research on fermented black garlic, produced through a related heat-based fermentation method, has documented significantly elevated antioxidant activity compared to raw garlic, with a notable and measurable increase in S-allocysteine concentration. A spoonful of the fermented brine itself, drizzled directly over a salad or roasted vegetables, delivers dissolved sulfur compounds in a highly bioavailable, easily absorbed form. Whole fermented cloves can also be mashed directly into softened butter, producing a spreadable condiment that carries a benefit into almost any savory dish. Number 19. Fermented carrots, the single most approachable lacto-fermented vegetable for anyone brand new to the practice of home fermentation. Carrots fermented in salt brine over 3 to 7 days develop a healthy population of Lactobacillus plantarum while fully retaining much of their original nutritional profile, including beta-carotene and naturally occurring prebiotic fiber. Unlike more assertively flavored ferments that can overwhelm a beginner, carrots stay mild, slightly sweet, and pleasantly crunchy throughout the process, which makes them an easy entry point for households, including many across North Carolina's growing small batch fermentation and farmers market scene, that are experimenting seriously with home fermentation for the very first time. The pectin and inulin naturally present in carrots directly feed the lactic acid bacteria introduced during fermentation, producing what researchers formally term a symbiotic, a single food that delivers both the beneficial bacteria and the exact fuel those bacteria need to survive digestion and colonize the gut. Research on fermented vegetable consumption consistently shows this combined delivery method outperforms probiotic supplements taken in isolation without any accompanying fiber. A jar costs little more than carrot salt and a bit of patience on the counter. Cutting them into thin spears rather than large chunks speeds up the fermentation timeline and gives young children an easy, approachable introduction to fermented vegetables. Number 20. Sourdough bread, the ferment that may have shaped human civilization more profoundly than any other single food in our history. Archaeological evidence points to fermented leavened bread appearing at least 5,000 years ago, long before anyone on Earth understood microbiology in any formal sense. A sourdough starter is a living culture of wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria, commonly including Lactobacillus sanfrancesensis, a strain closely associated with California's sourdough tradition and widely credited as the source of the distinctive tangy character San Francisco bread, has been known for since the gold rush era of the mid-1800s. The fermentation process gradually lowers the dough's pH, begins breaking down phytic acid that would otherwise block nutrient absorption in wheat, and partially predigests the gluten proteins that many people find genuinely difficult to process in commercial bread. Here is the honest science, and this channel will always give you the honest version. Baking kills the living bacteria entirely, so sourdough is not technically a probiotic food in the strict sense of the term. What it delivers instead is a grain product that has been chemically transformed by fermentation into something meaningfully lower glycemic and considerably gentler on digestion than standard commercial bread, made with commercial yeast. Research from Harvard School of Public Health has included sourdough among fermented foods associated with reduced inflammatory markers, driven specifically by that biochemical transformation rather than by any live bacterial delivery to the gut. For people who have quietly given up on bread altogether because of digestive discomfort, genuine long-fermented sourdough is very often the food that brings them back. A longer bulk fermentation, stretched out over 18 to 24 hours in the refrigerator rather than rushed at room temperature, allows even more of that phytic acid breakdown to occur before the loaf ever reaches the oven. That is a complete framework, and I want to leave you with exactly how to actually use it going forward. For direct probiotic power, reach for kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, natto, and beet kvass whenever you can. For symbiotic foods that deliver live bacteria alongside their own built-in fuel source, look to fermented carrots, miso, tempeh, and raw fermented pickles as your first choice. For gentle, high-diversity rebuilding, especially after illness or a round of antibiotics, film joke, lassi, aran, skyr, and traditional buttermilk do the work quietly without overwhelming a sensitive digestive system that needs time to recover. For dairy you can genuinely trust at the grocery store, check labels carefully for live cultures on yogurt, cottage cheese, and raw aged cheese before anything goes in your cart. And for the deeper cultural traditions worth honoring in your own kitchen, kombucha, fermented garlic, and sourdough each carry fermentation legacies that stretch back thousands of years across entirely different continents and unrelated food cultures. None of this is a supplement protocol, and it was never meant to be one. It is simply how food was made before refrigeration existed, before industrial agriculture reshaped the food system, and before anyone needed a label to tell them what was actually alive and what was not. If this video changed how you look at your own refrigerator, even a little, hit that like button and tell me in the comments which food on this list surprised you the most. Are you Team Kefir, Team Natto, or Team Beet Kvass? I genuinely read the comments, and I want to know where you land. Subscribe if you have not already, because we are building something real here, a community that takes ancestral food wisdom seriously and backs every claim with the actual science behind it. Your gut is not something to fix with a pill you take once and forget about. It is a living ecosystem that responds to what you feed it every single day, built and rebuilt with every meal, whether you are paying attention to that fact or not. You do not need to eat all 20 of these foods this week, or even this month. Pick 2, the ones that felt most useful or most surprising as you listened, and start there. Whether that means a jar of raw sauerkraut in your next grocery run, or finally sourcing real kefir grains instead of another bottle from the refrigerated aisle. Small, consistent changes to what fills your plate compound over months in ways a single dramatic overhaul never quite manages to sustain. Think about it this way. Every single culture we talked about today, from the shepherds in the Caucasus to the farmers in the Shenandoah Valley to the home cooks across Texas making lassi in a blender, arrived at fermentation independently, without comparing notes, without any shared scientific framework, simply because it worked and their family stayed healthier because of it. That is not a coincidence, repeated 20 separate times across 20 unrelated cultures. That is a pattern. And patterns like that are usually worth paying attention to, especially when modern research keeps arriving at the same conclusion from a completely different direction. You do not need a lab coat or a research budget to benefit from any of this. You need a jar, some salt, a little patience, and a willingness to trust a process that outlasted empires. The rest of this list will still be here when you are ready for it, and so will we. And now you know exactly how to feed it.